I was finished, they stood in my own kitchen laughing about it, and I sat right there at the table pretending to read the newspaper. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a small but solid electrical contracting business in Sudbury, Ontario. I poured everything into that company. The early mornings, the cold winters crawling through unfinished basements, the years when my wife and I ate pasta 4 nights a week because payroll came first. I built it from a pickup truck and a tool belt into a company with 11 employees, a good reputation, and a comfortable life. My wife's name is Nadine. We met when I was 28 at a Canada Day barbecue at a friend's place near Lake Ramsey. She laughed at something I said, and I thought, that's it. That's the one. We got married the following spring. Our daughter, Lee, was born 2 years later. For a long time, things were good. Not perfect, no marriage is, but good, solid. The kind of life you feel grateful for when you stop to think about it. I started noticing something was wrong around the time I turned 60. Small things at first. Nadine would take calls in the backyard and come in looking flushed, explaining nothing. She started going to a Thursday evening book club that seemed to produce no books and no stories about what was discussed. She became distant in a way that felt deliberate, like she was already practicing life without me. Then I met Marcus. Or rather, I discovered Marcus. A name on her phone screen one afternoon when she'd left it face up on the kitchen counter. She came back into the room and flipped it over quickly, but not before I'd seen it. Not a name I recognized. The way she moved told me everything. I didn't say a word. I thought about that moment many times since then. Most people, I think, would have confronted the situation right away, demanded answers, made accusations, started the war immediately. But something in me went very quiet instead. I had spent my whole adult life learning that the worst mistakes you can make in business and in life come from acting before you fully understand what you're dealing with. When a circuit breaker keeps tripping, you don't just replace it. You trace the whole line first. So I traced the line. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Elspeth, who worked out of a small office near the Flour Mill neighborhood and came highly recommended by my company's lawyer. I told her what I suspected. She told me what she needed. I gave her 3 weeks. What she brought back was worse than I'd imagined, but also clarifying in a strange way. Marcus was a financial advisor, 51 years old, divorced, living in a condo in the Donovan. He and Nadine had been seeing each other for nearly 2 years, but the photographs and the timeline were only part of what Elspeth had found. The other part involved my business. About 18 months earlier, Nadine had convinced me to add her name to the business accounts. I'd resisted at first, not out of suspicion, but because I'd always kept our personal and business finances deliberately separate. She wore me down over several months, talking about transparency and partnership and what would happen if something happened to me suddenly. I was 61. It seemed reasonable. I signed the papers. What I didn't know was that Marcus was helping her. He'd laid out a plan, from what Elspeth pieced together through financial records and other documentation, to position Nadine to claim the business as a marital asset in a divorce, one she was already quietly planning. She had begun documenting her involvement in the company. She forwarded herself emails I'd written where I asked her opinion on minor things, making it look like she was a working partner. She had Marcus draft letters that she kept in a folder, building a paper trail that would suggest she was integral to the company's operation. She was going to take my business, or at least half of it, which, at the valuation Marcus had quietly arranged through a contact of his, would have left me with almost nothing. I sat with that knowledge for 2 weeks. I went to work every morning. I came home every evening. I ate dinner across from Nadine and talked about ordinary things. The weather, the neighbors, a story from the news. She had no idea that I knew. She was still smiling at me with that practiced smile, and I smiled back, and inside I felt something I can only describe as cold clarity. I called my lawyer Douglas first. He'd been handling my business affairs for over a decade. I drove to his office on a Tuesday morning in February, parked on Elm Street, walked in, and put Elspeth's full report on his desk. He read it carefully. He looked up at me. He said, "How long have you known?" I said, "Long enough." Douglas told me we had work to do and we needed to move carefully and quickly. The most important thing, he said, was to protect the business. If Nadine filed first, while her name was still on those accounts, we would be fighting uphill. We needed to restructure things legally in a way that reflected the actual reality of the company's ownership and my sole operation of it for 31 years. We also needed documentation, real documentation. Not the manufactured kind Nadine had been assembling, but the genuine financial and operational record of my business that showed clearly and factually what I had built and how I had built it. That part turned out to be easier than I expected, because I had always been meticulous. Every contract, every payment record, every employee file, going back to the very beginning. My accountant Barb had worked with me for 22 years. When Douglas brought her in on the situation, she looked at the paper trail Nadine had fabricated and almost laughed. The dates didn't align with the actual payroll records. The decisions Nadine claimed to have been involved in were contradicted by the company's own correspondence files. It was, Barb said flatly, amateur work, but even amateur work can cause serious damage if it's left to stand unchallenged. Douglas filed for divorce before Nadine had a chance to. That was the first thing. She came home one Thursday to find the papers waiting for her. I was sitting at the kitchen table when she walked in, reading the newspaper, same as always. She stood there holding the envelope, and I watched the calculation happen on her face. She was trying to figure out how much I knew. She kept her voice even. She said, "I think we should talk." I said, "I agree. You can talk to my lawyer." She called Marcus that night. I know because Elspeth had anticipated this and had advised me to document everything I could from that point forward. The conversation, from what I later learned, was panicked. Their plan depended on her filing first. Now they were scrambling. What followed was 4 months of legal proceedings that I will not pretend were easy. There were days I sat in Douglas's office feeling tired in a way I hadn't felt since those early years of building the company from nothing. Not physically tired. Emotionally exhausted by the sheer sustained effort of it. The meetings, the documents, the back and forth through lawyers, the deposition where I had to sit in a room with Nadine and Marcus's lawyer and answer questions as if I were the one who had something to explain. Nadine's legal team made 3 arguments. First, that she had been an active partner in the business. Second, that the restructuring Douglas had done was an attempt to hide assets. Third, that Marcus was simply a friend who had been providing informal financial guidance and was not relevant to the proceedings. All 3 fell apart. The active partnership claim was dismantled by Barb's documentation in about 20 minutes of testimony. The records were meticulous and unambiguous. Nadine had no substantive role in the operation of the company, not in payroll, not in contracts, not in licensing, not in client relations. The emails she had forwarded to herself were shown in their full context. One was me asking if she thought a particular client's color choice for a panel room looked professional. That was the sum of her partnership. The restructuring argument was more serious, but Douglas had anticipated it. Every step he had taken was documented, time-stamped, and legally clean. He had been careful precisely because he knew this accusation was coming. The Marcus argument, that he was merely a friend, collapsed when Douglas submitted the financial advisor's own written communications, obtained through discovery, outlining the strategy for Nadine's claim and his personal financial interest in the outcome. The judge, a woman in her late 50s who had been on the family court bench for over a decade, looked at the full record with an expression I can only describe as professionally unimpressed. She had, I suspect, seen variations of this scheme before. She looked at Nadine's counsel and asked very quietly how exactly the manufactured documentation was intended to be characterized. The lawyer had no good answer. I remember sitting in that courtroom, Douglas to my left, the winter light coming through the high windows on the south wall, and feeling for the first time in months like I could breathe at a normal pace. Not triumphant, not even relieved yet, just steady. Like the ground had come back under my feet. The judge's decision came down 6 weeks later. Nadine received what she was legally entitled to from our personal marital assets, savings, the family home, which we sold and split according to the settlement. That part was fair, and I accepted it. 31 years of marriage, whatever else happened, was a real thing. She was entitled to what was genuinely ours together. She received nothing from the business. The ruling was explicit. The company was a sole proprietorship that predated the marriage by 2 years, had been operated exclusively by me throughout its existence, and the evidence of attempted asset fraud was noted formally in the judgment. That notation matters. It goes on the record. Marcus lost his financial advisor designation 6 months later. His firm had quietly launched their own investigation once the court documents became public record. He had used company letterhead and client data infrastructure in constructing the documentation for Nadine's case. That, as it turned out, was a serious enough breach that the outcome was not a surprise to anyone. My daughter, Lee, lives in Halifax now with her husband and their 2 kids. She called me the night after the judgment. She'd known something was happening for a long time. Children always know, even adult ones, but she hadn't known the full scope of it. I told her as much as I thought she needed to know. There were tears, though, not the kind I expected. She was angry on my behalf in a way that was almost fierce. And underneath that, there was grief, because Nadine is her mother, and that doesn't go away regardless of what a person does. I told her that. I said, "She's still your mother. That part is separate." Lee said, "I know, Dad, but right now I'm just glad you're okay." I sold the business 14 months after the judgment. Not because I had to, because I was 63 and I'd been doing it for 31 years, and the offer from a larger electrical contractor out of North Bay was fair, and the timing felt right. I kept consulting for them through the transition. I spent a lot of time that first winter at my brother-in-law's cabin near Killarney, ice fishing and reading and not talking much, which is its own kind of medicine. There's something I've thought about a great deal since all of this happened. Not about Nadine or Marcus or the legal proceedings. About the moment I saw that name on her phone and went quiet instead of reacting. I spent my whole working life in the trades. Electricians learn very early that the most dangerous moments are not the obvious ones. The live wire you can see, the panel clearly labelled. The most dangerous moments are the ones where everything looks fine, where the system appears to be functioning, where the problem is somewhere hidden in the wall, and if you don't trace the line carefully before you start cutting, you're the one who ends up getting hurt. I traced the line. I waited until I understood what I was dealing with. I brought in the right people, moved in the right order, kept my face neutral and my mouth closed until the moment came when speaking was the right action. People have asked me since whether I felt anything in the courtroom when the judgment was read. Anger, satisfaction, grief. Some combination of all of them. The honest answer is that mostly I felt tired. And then, walking out of the courthouse into the February cold, the exhaust breath from the cars on Elm Street rising in the air, Douglas shaking my hand on the sidewalk, I felt something that took me a moment to name. It was the same feeling I had 31 years ago, driving away from my very first completed job. A modest panel upgrade in a bungalow on Kathleen Street. The homeowner had shaken my hand and said the place finally felt solid. I sat in my truck afterward, in the dark, and thought, I built something that works. Whatever comes next, I know how to do this. Standing outside that courthouse, I thought the same thing. I still do. I'd been asked, more than once, whether I regret staying quiet for so long after I first saw that name on Nadine's phone, whether the silence was weakness, whether I should have acted sooner, said something, confronted the situation the moment I felt it in my gut. I don't regret it. Not for a single day. What I've come to understand, not from any book or pastoral philosophy course, but from 31 years of working with my hands in conditions that don't forgive careless thinking, is that how you respond to a crisis tells you everything about who you actually are. Not who you think you are on a good morning. Who you are when something is being taken from you, and the easiest thing in the world would be to react badly. Nadine and Marcus were counting on me to react badly. Their entire plan depended on it. On me being the emotional one, the irrational one, the husband who made accusations without proof and gave their lawyers something to work with. They had built a trap that only works if you walk into it swinging. I didn't swing. That wasn't easy. I want to be honest about that, because I think people sometimes hear a story like this and imagine the person at the center of it was calm and strategic. the whole way through, like some kind of film character who never doubts himself. That wasn't me. There were nights I sat in my truck in the driveway for 20 minutes before going inside, just steadying myself. There were mornings I looked across the breakfast table at Nadine and felt a grief so heavy I didn't know how to carry it and pour a cup of coffee at the same time. The loss of a marriage, even one that turned out to be built on something rotten, is still a real loss. You grieve the version of it you thought was true. But I kept going. I made the calls I needed to make. I trusted Douglas and Barb, people who had earned that trust over years of honest work. I gathered what was real and let the truth of it stand on its own record. That's the thing about honesty, not as some noble ideal, but as a practical matter. When you've operated with integrity for 3 decades, the evidence is just there. You don't have to manufacture it. You don't have to remember which version of events you told to which person. You just open the filing cabinet and hand over the truth, and the truth does the work. What Marcus and Nadine built was an elaborate construction on a foundation of fabrication. And fabrications have a specific weakness. They require constant maintenance. Every false state has to align with another false state. Every invented email has to match an invented timeline. The structure looks solid until someone who knows what they're doing starts checking the connections, and then the whole thing comes apart at once. Lee called me last week. She's doing well in Halifax. The kids are growing fast. She sounds like herself again. She said something that I've been thinking about since. She said, "Dad, I think what I learned from all of this is that patience is actually a form of courage, not the flashy kind, the quiet kind that's harder to see." She's right. And I'd add to that, the quiet kind is the one that actually holds up under pressure. I'm 63 years old, living in a smaller place now near Sudbury, with enough to be comfortable and no one wasting my time or my trust. I still consult a few days a week. I fish when I want to. The mornings are mine. I built something that lasted, and I knew how to protect it when it mattered. That's enough.